Welcome to Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Joel Bryce, Vice President of Waterfowl and Hunter Recruitment Programs. And we're going to go through questions that have been submitted by our members and listeners, over the recent months and frankly, over the courses of our career. And so if this is your first time tuning into our podcast, go to our YouTube channel and you can watch, every one of those recorded podcasts. Or if you're like me, I prefer consuming podcasts through an audio download. So you can go to Apple, TuneIn, or Stitcher, download that straight to your phone, and honestly listen to it in your truck, on the way to work, on the way to the duck blind, or play it in your garage when you're tinkering around. That's my preferred way of consuming a podcast. So joining me on this podcast, we have John Devney, Delta's Senior Vice President. John's been on a podcast before. Hey, John.
Yep, we did it before. It was warmer then.
It was. Yep. It's fall weather. And then we have first-time podcast guest, but I think a lot of people will recognize his face from our migration updates and water condition updates. This is Matt Chenard. Matt is Delta's Senior Waterfowl Programs and Delta Marsh Property Manager, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, we've kind of tweaked your title a little bit the last few months.
Changed a few times.
Yeah, so you saw me stumble through that one. But again, welcome everybody and hope you take something out of this. John, 21, 22 years?
22 years in November.
Yeah, myself, this is starting my 20th year. Matt, how long has it been?
I guess I started full-time with Delta in 2007, but was a Delta student starting in 1999, Delta technician. So
yeah, so perhaps we've heard them all, perhaps not. We don't know. So we're looking forward to going through this. Matt, as a first-time guest here, just would love for you to kind of go through, introduce us to Matt Chenard. Where are you from? Talk about your family, and then just kind of give us a quick look at what you do for Delta.
Sounds good. I actually was born in Missouri, in St. Louis, and grew up in southeast Missouri in the Boot Heel. Grew up duck hunting there, of course. My dad was a passionate duck hunter and introduced me to duck hunting at a really young age. And so we hunted in northeast Arkansas and southeast Missouri in flooded timber and in rice fields, and really developed my passion for waterfowl hunting then. I have three brothers that were also just crazy about duck hunting. And so when I went to school, I went to the University of Missouri and somewhere along the lines found my dream chasing being a waterfowl biologist. And during that time, found out about Delta Waterfowl and applied for a job as a summer research technician, which is kind of the way a lot of Delta students come about, is they work in the summertime as a technician and develop their dreams of a project, a graduate project, and that's exactly what happened for me. I developed a passion, of course, for mallards, and I saw hen houses, and Delta was working with hen houses around that time, and developed a project on hen houses. Went to graduate school in Mississippi at Mississippi State, and actually conducted my research in Manitoba at one of our research facilities there in the Minnedosa area, and of course hen houses were very productive in my research project, as they've been with all of our hen house projects. And from there I went to work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for a few years, but I was in Nevada and I really wanted to find my way back to the prairies. I love the prairies. I love being where the ducks that we hunt across North America, where they're born, and so Delta had an opportunity to come back and work, and came back in 2007. Started off really focusing on hen houses, but as I've moved into the Bismarck office, now focusing on, our hen house and predator management programs, dabble a little bit in our Hunter 3 programs, and also because I have a background with some habitat management, I was asked to look at the Delta Marsh and the property there and work with our staff there to manage the habitat for nesting and staging waterfowl on their migration south. So,
cool. Married with kids.
Should have mentioned that before, but
yeah, I'm there for you.
My wife I actually met. She was a Delta student as well. My wife Michelle, and we got married I guess it's been 16 years ago or so, and we have 2 kids, Max and Madeline, who are very into hunting so far anyway, and it's been a blast.
Yeah, my wife and I, we both joke. We say we've been married 15 years. Wait, 16 years. 16 years next month, but about 20 with wind chill. So that's,
That's exactly right.
but worth every day of it. So that's cool. So one funny thing about you, Matt, is okay. So you're from Missouri, like you said. So there's a little bit of an accent there compared to us Midwestern boys here. And when I notice when you go back to Missouri for a week or so and you come back, it's a little stronger.
There's a little bit more of a twang.
Yeah.
They say the same thing when I'm down there. I come back and I sound like I'm from the north. I start saying words a little bit like you guys. But
Yeah, that's all right. So
And Matt is, we got to talk about Matt's great love of diving ducks. Because, because growing up in Missouri, he developed this incredible love of hunting diving ducks, right, man?
That's absolutely right. Those ringnecks and scaup that came into the flooded timber, they really stoked my passion.
yeah, well, hunting season has started here, right?
Yeah.
So we've pretty much gone through our dove season already.
Feels like it.
Yeah, sharp-tailed grouse, nice prairie upland bird. We both love to chase them. Those are upon us. The youth waterfowl season opened last weekend, and the youth deer season opened last weekend.
Yeah.
Did you guys get out at all with your kids?
We did for both, for the youth deer and the youth waterfowl. We're not so lucky on the deer side. My son really likes to duck hunt, but he's already figured out that duck season is 2 to 3 months. So, you might have opportunities, whereas deer season he has a short little window, and so he's really wants to get his deer. But we did have some success waterfowl hunting this past weekend too.
Awesome.
Shot a few ducks.
Yeah. Did you sneak out, John?
Yeah, I took my oldest, Catherine Grace. She's 11, and I was really proud of her. She dug in and did really well in hunter safety in January, and we had her out shooting a bunch this summer, and she got some really good instruction. And we had a great dove hunt with Matt, and I took our kids out, and his daughter and my daughter both shot their first dove that day, and then Catherine shot a couple of ducks last Saturday. So when she, got the whole experience, the walk out to the marsh in the dark and the coyotes howling, and covered up with teal. Never seen a glossy ibis before. Got to see glossy ibis, big shorebird migration. Heard cows making lots of strange sounds. So yeah, she had the whole deal, and it was pretty special, right? You guys, both of your kids, oldest, were boys, right? And so, here I was handed this little baby girl, it'll be 12 years ago in November, and I didn't know really what to do with those things, right? It's kind of like, first time somebody hands you a pair of wiring pliers and tells you to rewire something. I didn't know what to do. And so to have her, be excited to come hunting with Dad, and then being in the duck blind last Saturday was a pretty special moment.
Awesome, good for you. Yeah, we've been out after doves a few times, and like Matt said, the youth deer season's pretty short, so we went out, and my son was able to harvest his deer last weekend, so now it's on to ducks.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's pretty cool. Well, let's jump into it. So, we have questions here, and a lot of questions were submitted, but we tried to grab the ones that had, I guess, the most, were sent in the most frequently, or the most common. And so these are member-submitted questions, listener-submitted questions, and so we're just going to kind of jump through them here. So I think we'll just kind of start right at the top. So why is the organization called the Delta Waterfowl Foundation? And this is a pretty common one. A lot of our members are from the Deep South, right? Source area, from the ducks raised here in the prairies. So they say, is it named after the Mississippi Delta? So John, where did the Delta come from?
Yeah, well, it came from the Delta Marsh, which, is our sort of historic home, and that's where James Ford Bell got started. That's where Al Hochbaum got started. And it's an iconic place. And like a lot of marshes in this part of the world, it's not as productive as it once was. Lots of problems, carp and high water and all the rest of that stuff. But as a kid growing up in Minnesota, we derived a lot of our ducks that passed through the Delta Marsh. It's an iconic place. Jimmy Robinson wrote about it. Obviously, lots and lots of legend and tradition. But the reason it's called the Delta is not because it's a delta. It's because it was the fourth train stop,
Right.
and they used Roman numerals to name the trains. So the Delta became the it became the Delta Marsh because it was, I suppose, the fourth train stop from Winnipeg heading west.
Alpha, beta.
Alpha,
Gamma,
beta,
the
gamma.
Greek alphabet, right?
yeah, the Greek
Delta,
alphabet.
yeah.
So
Alpha,
that's
beta,
how
gamma,
it's
delta.
got its name. Doesn't have anything to do with Mississippi or Arkansas or Louisiana. It's the Greek alphabet and the Delta Marsh, which is a long way from the Mississippi Delta.
Yeah, like I said, it's not even a delta. That's a really, that one has popped up forever.
Right.
When, through travels, it's not obvious why we're the Delta waterfowl. And that's not
Right.
even our original name. It's the North American wildlife.
It's gone
something.
through lots of permutations. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. Delta waterfowl, named after a train stop on the Trans-Canada Railroad. So that one's a mouthful. Okay, so we call ourselves the Duck Hunters Organization. And that's not to say that we don't work on other species or promote or support other species, but so the question is, why does Delta only focus on ducks and not geese, cranes, doves, swans? Matt, do you have some thoughts on that? And we're just going to kick this one around. And so
Right.
just
I feel like, and I feel like this is the way Delta thinks as well, is that ducks face the biggest obstacles right now for their populations. The biggest portion of North American ducks nest right here in the prairie pothole region. It's one of the most impacted landscapes in North America. Lots of changes to the landscape from farming and wetland drainage, and so those ducks that are our core, breeding population that make up to 70% of the ducks we harvest in North America. They're born right here, and so they have the biggest issues. This is where we can have the biggest impact on waterfowl and ducks and improving, duck numbers for hunters. If you look at geese, many of them nest in the Arctic, in areas that haven't really been impacted by humans, and
Right.
and in fact, goose numbers in many cases are considered overabundant. There's so many geese in some areas that they've become a problem, and so we don't feel like our need is there to step in for geese like they are for ducks. But that's not to say if there was an issue for geese, a significant issue where Delta felt like we needed to step in, that we wouldn't step in, just like we do for crane seasons in Alberta or dove seasons where, those opportunities arise. Delta uses our voice to help in those situations. But we feel like our biggest impact is for ducks and duck hunters is on ducks.
Yeah, and like you're saying, it's kind of ground zero, right?
Right.
We're here. You can't tell where we are looking here, but you drive just a mile outside of this yard site here, and you're going to see intensive agriculture, right? And intensive agriculture and waterfowl can get along, but oftentimes they don't, right? Wetland drainage, the conversion of grass to cropland, right, John? I mean,
Yeah. And if you look back in Delta's history, it's kind of interesting, and you can reflect on it. I think you can too, Joel. The fate of Canada geese has really changed in our lifetime, right? I remember growing up in the Twin Cities, and we're in Minnesota, and being in a closed Canada goose zone, because that was one of the early reintroductions of giant Canada geese. And if you go back in Delta's history, Delta was involved in those early reintroduction efforts of giant
Right.
Canada geese. Delta was involved in swans because those were issues at the time. But if you look around, nobody's concerned about the population status of temperate breeding Canada geese. We have issues like, in places like the Atlantic Flyway with the AP Canada geese, but geese are really abundant in providing opportunities that I think our fathers and grandfathers would be mesmerized by. We're shooting geese, 9 months out of the year here in North Dakota, when you bring in spring conservation orders and early Canada goose seasons, and across most of the flyways, again, with the exception of the Atlantic Flyway, goose seasons and goose bag limits are incredibly liberal. And so when it comes to the issues on, cranes, geese, swans, and other birds like that, it's way more about hunter advocacy and opportunity
Right.
than it is about research or conservation, because frankly, there just isn't much to do for those species. They're all doing really, really, really well.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think, if people go back to the last podcast we did for the first time with Dr. Chris Nicolai, we talked about a fall flight forecast for Arctic nesting geese in particular. And we drew the line between the local, giant Canada goose that has all the early seasons. What's the limit here for giant?
15.
15. I mean, they're very overabundant. But if you draw the line between temperate and Arctic nesting geese, the Arctic nesting geese, their hands are kind of in their fate is in Mother Nature's hands.
Right.
Was it a late spring? Did they get a big snowstorm? Was there some? So it's banding, it's regulations, it's harvest management, and we do play a role in those aspects. But honestly, the Arctic nesting geese, based on location and largely having an intact habitat base, there isn't a need for a nest structure program or a trapping program or a habitat program, frankly. So we are, and I think just to kind of look in there, John, we've dealt with crane seasons, dove seasons, right? Advocating for that.
Yeah, a lot of it. I mean, we were, one of the more exciting crane opportunities that's happened in the last number of years is these eastern crane populations have increased. There's, you look at a place like Tennessee that 20 years ago would have never imagined to have a crane season. Well, those populations are doing exceptionally well. So Tennessee had a crane, was evaluating a crane season that we were involved with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Kentucky had proposed a crane season. And I tell you, duck hunters, just so you know this, that is a big fight. In being engaged in those crane issues in terms of advocating for more opportunities for hunters, that gets contentious really quick.
Yeah.
I was surprised in Kentucky it was as contentious as it was. It was so contentious in Tennessee that they actually deferred on the decision for a couple of years. Wisconsin now is talking about a crane season. Michigan's been talking about it. Minnesota's talking about expanding the boundaries of their crane season. But the good news is those populations are doing exceptionally well, and it's providing lots of opportunity. I think Ontario is evaluating a crane season, and so we want to make sure we're advocating for those new opportunities. Again, the world cranes don't need an intervention from Delta waterfowl necessarily, but we can play a role in terms of advocating for more opportunities.
Yeah, as long as the science supports it.
Exactly.
Which it does.
Which it clearly does.
Then it just comes down to establishing, a season and establishing regulations and infrastructure going forward.
Yeah.
So but yes, so we are the Duck Hunters organization. It's an awesome tagline. Our members are primarily duck hunters, but we hunt doves, we hunt geese. I mean, we're out there on a lot of issues, right?
Yeah.
Not just waterfowl. So where do you work? Now that one doesn't come across so much to me, to be honest with you, as in, why don't you guys do work in the South? I think I might rephrase that one. Why do you guys just work in the North, and why don't you, have wintering ground programs? And like Matt, you mentioned, that the lion's share of the continental duck population comes from the prairie pothole region, basically Alberta across to Manitoba, and then a small portion of Manitoba or Montana, primarily North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, a little sliver of Iowa. I mean, that can produce up to 70% of the continental duck population on a given year. So we're a relatively small organization in the grand scheme of conservation nonprofits, and so we've chosen to take on the prairie pothole region and our issue and the issues there, right, John?
Yeah, although again, I think if you look back historically, I think over time Delta's research has addressed the questions where they've needed to be. And if you go back and you look through the literature, there's a lot of that Delta research that was in places like Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, South Carolina, California. And so it's a function of where the issues are emerging, right? But obviously, if you're going to be doing duck production work, you do that where the ducks are produced. And we can do the greatest net good for ducks and duck hunters by doing that right here in the prairie pothole region. When it comes to our research and science, that can become, prioritizing the most important issues of the day. That could be A lot of that's historically gone on in the prairies for the same reason I just mentioned. But we've done a lot of good research in places like California, in the South, in the Atlantic Flyway. I mean, the ringneck work we're doing is taking place in the wintering grounds.
I think, yeah, you've made an important distinction. So there's on the ground programming where we want to impact the landscape or impact duck populations. Those are in the prairies, right? But our advocacy work, defending the hunt, our research, our policy work, that's a continental effort.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of it's where do you place your eggs, right?
I mean, you look at the work we did on the last Farm Bill, and Delta's talked a lot about, especially this year, about the prairie pothole water quality wildlife program, which was born out of working wetlands. But there's another component part of that language that we got in the Farm Bill, and that's to provide for post-harvest flooding in places like Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, California, and Mississippi. And so, we're working, that hasn't been as fruitful. We haven't seen as much progress on that side of that language. But that's going to mean really important things for duck hunters in those southern states, because as Matt will tell you, I mean, you've got way more experience in that part of the world. That part of the land world isn't showing water like it did 20 years ago. And I think it's probably impacted duck hunter success and duck distribution in the South. So, yeah, I mean, the work we're doing is having a continental reach. And it just, there's not much need to do predator management in Mississippi to benefit breeding ducks.
Yeah, no, it's about, how can we have, the maximum impact to our constituent, the duck hunter. And, if we focus on the breeding grounds, those ducks go everywhere, right? And then there might be a hot button research project in the Southeast, on the West Coast, in Central Canada. Our hunting advocacy is everywhere. So, Matt, this would be, I think, a neat opportunity here. You did your master's degree on hen houses, and so if this is your first time hearing the word hen house, it's a artificial nest structure, almost exclusively used by mallards. It's mounted on a pole over a wetland. It basically eliminates ground predators from destroying duck nests. You banded ducklings inside those nest cylinders before they left, right?
That's correct. Yeah, actually, my research, I guess it would have been in the early 2000s, and another Delta student, Dan Colton, we both banded ducklings with what at the time they were using these things called plasticine bands. And the bands had some clay inside them. They were actually a size 7 band for mallards, but of course a duckling has a smaller leg, and so the clay would wear away as the duckling grew, and this band would remain. And so we could see where these ducklings that were hatched in hen houses, we could see where they went, if they were harvested in the fall, and we could also recapture them in the subsequent springs to see how many of these ducklings were returning to nest in their same natal areas. And so I guess where you were probably going with that is, these ducklings that we were banding in our hen house program in Manitoba, where they ended up, and it was actually quite, a broad area. I mean, we're banding in my case, a 12 square mile area near Minnedosa, and there were ducklings harvested in Indiana and Texas and other places as well, like Alberta, went back to other areas. And of course, when I banded these ducklings, I didn't know if they were, hens or drakes at that time. But the hens, of course, are more likely to return right to where they were born, and the drakes will follow a hen wherever she goes. And so many of those ducks were harvested in kind of crazy locations. One was harvested in Maryland. And
see, look at that. I mean, that's a great example. So you do the work at the headwaters of duck production, and they scatter to the wind.
Yeah.
And and especially, so we have duck production programs going on in Alberta, in Manitoba, in the Dakotas, and Minnesota. And so obviously, if you get over to Alberta, you're starting to send your ducks more Central and Pacific Flyway oriented, and likewise for the nest structures we have in Ontario. Those are heading down the Eastern Flyway. So that's a great portrayal of how we benefit duck hunters, with our duck production efforts. Let's shift gears. Actually, I want to go to this one. This one is, I get this one all the time. Do you guys do all the banding of ducks? So Matt, you talked about duck banding for your hen houses. So do you guys do all the duck banding? I don't know. I hear that one a lot. Is that pretty common?
Well, no, we don't. That's mostly conducted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Canadian Wildlife Service, and states cooperate as well through the flyway system to do the banding of ducks and geese. We do, occasionally there'll be a research project that requires some manner of marking, but for the most part, the biggest question I get all the time is someone calls and says, I found a Delta waterfowl band, and I want to return it to whoever, shot it. And generally, unfortunately, as part of our banquet system, our chapters often have the raffles that have a band with a number on there, and it's pretty generic. It doesn't say anything specific on there, but it does say Delta waterfowl, and then of course we get those questions. But to answer your question, no, we don't do the majority of banding.
Right. Fairly common for a student of ours. Honestly, if they ever handle a duck, it's pretty common for a banding effort to be incorporated into that project, right?
Yeah, and I think people probably don't have a real clear understanding of the banding program. Obviously, hunters treasure bands, and hunters have just assumed there are about 1,000 times more ducks banded every year than there are ducks and geese banded every year. But the Fish and Wildlife Service and the partners in the flyways are pretty deliberate about those banding programs. Mm-hmm. They're not just willy-nilly out there putting jewelry on ducks, right? And so, there are certainly cases, especially with species that they don't capture a lot of, that they're eager for us to help with when we have encounters to mark those birds. I've got one of the great band stories, and here's a case of an actual Delta waterfowl band. Is you guys will both remember at the old station we had that we had a captive flock of mallards at the Delta Marsh there, just off the backside of the hatchery, and this is probably going back, I don't know, 10, 15 years. It was one of the first really bad outbreaks of West Nile. And they're really concerned about the ducks. Delta Marsh, by the way, not only is it a historic duck marsh, it's the greatest place to get eaten alive by mosquitoes on planet Earth. And so there are a lot of mosquitoes, and they're worried about the flock. And I think basically what the idea was, they were going to take them to the University of Saskatchewan and Saskatoon and test them for West Nile. Well, as it turned out, I'm going to back up here for a second. So I was up there that fall, and we were duck hunting, actually filming a television show with Benelli, and one of the guys had shot a duck and it had fallen way out, dead. And so at the end of the hunt, I grabbed my lab and we went and found that duck, and the dog brought it back. And as all hunters know, you get that moment where the dogs bring it back and you see a little shine off the leg, and I was pretty excited. I didn't shoot the duck, but I was pretty excited about it. And I look at the band, and something was clearly not right about the band, when at first glimpse. And turns out it was it said Delta Waterfowl Research Station on it, and it had a number. And I thought it was from our old captive release program that we did back in the late 80s and early 90s. But here's what had happened is this graduate student of ours at the time was driving all these mallards from Delta to Saskatoon and had them in big, essentially chicken crates, right? And somebody hadn't wired the door down, and apparently as he was driving down the number 16 highway at Minnedosa, there were mallards spilling out the top. and so that duck that was harvested was an escapee on the way from Delta out to the University of Saskatchewan, and just by what are the odds?
That's funny.
That we were there in Manitoba hunting just outside of Minnedosa that fall and shot one and have an authentic that actually was banded by Delta.
Wow.
With the Delta Waterfowl band. But certainly the sort of neat story, but not the rule.
Yeah. No, we've had quite a few call-ins. Hey, I got this band. And some of them, I don't know how they ended up on a duck or goose. I have no idea, but I guess they did. And so we said, well, it's, guess the joke's on you, kind of. There's,
your buddy has a,
we
check
used
your
to play
buddy
that
for,
game, we'd take a band and stick it on a duck.
Check your buddy's blind bag for a pair of pliers.
But on the other hand, we've run into some pretty cool stories. I've had a few calls. I shot this duck with a transmitter on it, or a goose with a transmitter on it, and it's a small world out there. So we usually know, what study or where that was involved. So that's pretty neat.
Nasal saddles was one back in the 80s. There were a lot of nasal.
I think it was last year we had a hunter in Minnesota harvested one of the ringnecks that we had marked in Georgia. Had migrated. This was in the original year, which I think was 2017 or 18. Yeah. This bird was marked, and so the transmitter was no longer functioning. But this hen had gone back and forth multiple times with his transmitter in there. Was totally fine, of course, until she got shot by the hunter in Minnesota. And because of his familiarity with Delta, there wasn't any marker on there that said call Delta, but he saw the transmitter coming out the little antenna and called us up and said, "Hey, I've got this. Would you be interested, in getting it back?" And of course, we were kind of curious and asked him about the condition of the duck. And it was kind of
a lot of times in those types of situations, and I don't know what we did, but a lot of times in those situations, the researcher does want the transmitter back. It can either be reprogrammed, refurbished. They're worth quite a bit of money, or there's data stored on those transmitters that you can only pull off in hand. But a lot of times, for that reason, the hunter, they would love that transmitter, so there's a dummy that's given in return, either for taxidermy purposes or just for a keepsake. So that's pretty neat. So Matt, hen houses. I want to touch a little bit on the programs that I'm gonna kind of the two most common questions that I've gotten on hen houses, and you get more, is on your website it says to use flax straw to roll and configure the tunnel. The other one is, well, actually I'm going to say three of them. How many do I put out? How many do I put out per wetland? And then the third one, which is a little bit more generic, I'm from Texas, I'm from Oklahoma, I'm from somewhere. Do they work here? And so maybe start at the top and I know we have BMPs, but start with the material question.
Well, that material question is a good one. We use flax straw here in the prairies because flax straw is grown and it's a very common, crop, especially in North Dakota, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and it has a very durable straw. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an oil seed, and so the straw takes quite a while to deteriorate. It's very tangly, so when you put it in the exterior portion of your nest structure, it'll last. In the absence of a duck in there pulling it out, which hens, quite frequently do, it will last for years. And so that's our thing, is to use flax straw wherever you could find it. But outside of the prairies, flax is not very common at all. And so I always recommend to people, find some manner of grass, hay, whatever, a long cut grass hay is probably the best. Don't use alfalfa. Don't use any kind of wheat straw or barley straw. Those things are really brittle. They break up and fall out of the exterior of your tunnel. Use something that's got fairly leafy, long, blades of grass or whatever. And brome works good.
I've seen people try to use rice straw, and that might be the ultimate bad idea, right? For that, I mean, it's what you had available, but it shorter strands, it
brittle,
tends to brittle, and essentially you have this beautiful tunnel of wire and straw, but after time it just settles into the bottom, right? And you have maybe 2/3 of the tunnel just a bird cage.
Kind of tied to the same thing, like lots of people ask, can you use something artificial for the exterior? And we've tried a lot of different artificial, and some of them do work. Don't get me wrong, they will work occasionally, but the more natural looking tunnel tends to have the highest use rates. And honestly, it's more appealing for me anyway, and lots of people tell me that as well, to look at a wetland and see a hen house in it. A more natural looking hen house is more appealing than to see something that has made out of plastic or
chunk of brown carpet.
Yeah.
Some people do put that in there, put the exterior, some kind of grass material outside of that carpet, and they still go out and replace it, and we visit our nest structures every single year to touch up any of that exterior and replace nest material. And I think that a whole nother question, but it's vital as well. But putting that layer of carpet with the exterior, some natural vegetation, sometimes that does last a long time because the carpet keeps the hens are notorious from sitting on their nest and just reaching up and grabbing stuff, even on a natural nest on the ground, and grabbing things and pulling it down and adding to their nest bowl. And in hen houses, it's no different. Sometimes a hen will reach up and pull every strand of nest material or exterior material down and make her bowl this tall just because she wants to,
Well, that's the factoid, right? Like an oriole. I remember as a kid, we'd put out pieces of string in the yard so the orioles would grab it and take it to their nest. But ducks make their nest from on-site materials, right?
That's
so
right.
They don't fly in with some grass. So that's the really
They're not
important
carrying
part.
alfalfa.
That's right. And that's why it's so important to visit it every year. I mean, a duck's not going to bring any nest material there. They're going to work with what's there.
Right.
In a hen house, if you haven't taken care of it on an annual basis, lots of times there's nothing there, and sometimes hens will even try to lay an egg in the absence of any nest material there. And so we visit them every year to make sure they're productive.
Okay. So kind of a generic question. Try to answer this one to everybody, no matter where they're at. Where should I put them? How many can I put out?
Well, I always encourage people, if they're going to try nest structures, they work really well where there's lots of breeding mallards. And when I say lots, in Manitoba, when I was doing pair counts, I would count up to 20 mallard pairs per square mile.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot. You get in other parts of the country, there may be breeding mallards, but it may be 1 or 2 pairs per square mile. And so you put up a hen house, that 1 or 2 pairs that lives around there, they have to pick that site. So your odds are a little bit lower. They may have other choices. So I encourage people, no matter where you're at, they do work. We've heard of hen houses working in lots of different places, but I encourage people to start small.
Mm-hmm.
Put out 1 or 2 nest structures in your pond or wetland and see if they work. And if they work really well, then you can always add more at a later time. But I hate to see people put a huge investment, in nest structures and then be disappointed and discouraged. But with that said too, when you put out a hen house, give it a few years. Right. Because that hen that's nesting in there, that hen that's using that pond as her feeding area, she may have a nest site in mind for that year already, and she'll try that. And if she's unsuccessful, she'll try different spots. And if she does eventually make it into the hen house and try the hen house, and she has a high likelihood of being successful, she'll continue to use that hen house year after year. And you can build upon that. I've seen places where we've put out, quite a few hen houses in good areas, and the first year we had 0 use. And we think, wow, what happened here? And then the next year, if you got 2 or 3 used, and 3 or 4 years down the road, all 20 are used. And that's a pretty common occurrence here in the prairies where, it just takes a little bit for that hen that's using that area to make the decision to try one.
Right. And they're probably primarily a breeding ground tool, right? Just simply from the key there, you had the highest breeding densities of mallards. So if one hen is looking at that hen house and she decides she doesn't want to do it, it's not going to get used. But if there's 20 or 24 different hens that have that opportunity to look at it, it works. So again, for one reason or another, they're wildly successful in the Prairie Pottle region, wildly successful. And then it's the results are diverse, right, from really successful to I wish more of them got used.
Right.
And so, what's the strangest place you've heard of someone using a hen house?
Well, I don't know that it's strange, but there's some really cool stories from Europe from people that have heard about hen houses through Delta and have used hen houses there with lots of success. I've heard of hen houses being used in Louisiana, which you don't think of Louisiana as being an area where there's lots of mallards nesting, but I have heard of mallards nesting in hen houses in Louisiana. Lots of cases in cities. Yeah. People put them up on golf courses, and you think, well, there's not a lot of, there's some mallards breeding around here, but golf courses, quite frequently you hear that. I've heard of hen houses being on the ground and not installed. Someone build a hen house and they set it on the ground and we're waiting for the next fall or next winter to install them. and a hen nested in it while it was on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I guess in summary, if you have local breeding mallards, no matter where you are, it's worth a shot.
Right.
Just set your proper expectations, put a few out, and let the results tell you what to do next, right?
We have there's a great story from a Delta chapter individual from Ohio, and he followed kind of our plan. He put out a hen house in his wetland behind his house. In the first year, he had a hen jump in there and was successful and did lots of video and pictures on the website. And so he would call me and say, "Can I put more up or whatever, or should I put more up?" And we talked it through. And this year, he had quite the battle. It's right behind his house, and you could see multiple hens trying to nest in the same hen house. So he put up another hen house, and he even had these hens named, of course. Hen number 2 immediately stopped fighting over hen house 1 and moved into hen house 2.
Huh.
And over the course of this summer, he had 4 nests in the 2 hen houses behind his house, and he also had a wood duck box that was successful too. And just 4 broods of ducks hatched from 2 hen houses in your backyard. I mean, it can be very effective, and even outside of the prairies.
We love those stories, right? That's if listeners have an experience, geez, give us a call, send us an email. We love it. Pictures, a hen in a hen house. It's quite photogenic. Just gonna sit there pretty patient. Send us a picture. So transitioning here is, we get this question a lot. So I just said, send an email, give us a phone call. So the one question is does my voice get heard to the top people in the organization? And man, I tell you what, John, I don't know about you, but that's a real source of pride. The answer to that is a strong source of pride. What's your thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I mean, I'll reflect on an event or an incident that happened yesterday. Guy called and left a message. He's got some questions about some changes in how a state is going to manage their local hunting. And, I had kind of a busy morning yesterday, but I called him yesterday right after lunch, and he was sort of astonished, right? That, holy cow, not only did you actually respond, but you responded quickly. And yeah, I think it's been a great source of pride for me too as well, Joel, because I think Delta's always had the culture, and maybe it's because we were smaller and nimbler and closer, that, we wanted to be very responsive to our membership. And I'll also reflect on, not our current strategic plan, but the one before it, that Jason Tharp led, and I think is a big reason that we're having the kind of impact we are having today. And Jason said, listen, it doesn't matter the organization we want.
Mm-hmm.
We have to reflect the organization of the will of what duck hunters want.
Right.
And we need to be hunter-centric in terms of listening to what our members, our volunteers, and our donors want us to be. Because the organization that we want to be, and I think a lot of Delta's history, I mean, you go from 1938 until the mid-1990s, Delta did kind of whatever cool science a handful of scientists wanted to do. And that was of great merit and of great value. But I think some of that research we wouldn't support today, Joel or Matt, right? And so, yes, your voice is heard. We can go through a million examples where people have been, frankly, I think, blown away that we've been able to respond promptly and help them out on issues like you and I talked about some time ago that are really important to them where they duck hunt, right?
Yeah, I think, you pick up the phone today and you ask for, our CEO, Scott Petrie, odds are you're going to catch him.
Right.
If not, it's really important to him that you get a call back from him real quick. So it's part of our culture, and I hope we always hang on to that.
Agreed. We've been able to do it for the 20-some years we've been around, and that Matt's been associated with the organization. I don't see that change.
No, I don't either. So this one, another one here, and this is, so Delta has, take all the work we do, we have 4 main pillars. And the description of these pillars are kind of new, so let me go through these. We have duck production, we have Hunter 3, which is our defending the hunt, hunter recruitment work. We have research and education, and I think those other three are pretty obvious, but the fourth one catches some people by surprise, and that's called habitat conservation. They'll say, I didn't know you guys did habitat. I thought you just were the trapper guys or the hen house guys. John, that's right up your alley. Delta does habitat. Explain that.
Yeah, and Delta's done habitat for a long time. I mean, if you go back predating our time, right? If you go way, way back, it was Delta research that really demonstrated it was small wetlands on private lands that drove continental duck production, right? And that was at a time where a lot of the time, effort, and energy was being put into building, drought-proofing the prairies, right? Big, sort of almost civil engineering projects, right? And so it was that early Delta research that really demonstrated that link between small wetlands behind the farm and what duck hunters saw in the fall. And so Delta's always been on the science side, but then in the early 1990s when Delta sort of got into more demonstration and I wouldn't call it delivery, I'd call it demonstration, I guess, was thinking about these things. And, there was Adopt a Pothole in the early 1990s. There was a prairie farming program. And then shortly after that, we took Adopt a Pothole to advocate for the first easement legislation, and Delta took the first wetland easement in Prairie Canada. I mean, that's pretty remarkable, right? And then there was Alice. And so Delta's had this tradition, for a number of years of trying to find ways in a uniquely Delta way to deal with the habitat challenges that are out there. And listen, you've got, in the duck space, you've got Ducks Unlimited, who does a really good job at that work. And you've got and we have the benefit of the Fish and Wildlife Service, at least on this side of the border, that does an incredible job at that work. And so I think the thing for Delta is how can we add value to that? And not to mention the work of the California Waterfowl Association or Pheasants Forever, the Nature Conservancy, and all the rest of the people are doing great and important habitat work. How do we use our resources to influence habitat in a new and incremental way? And frankly, I think we've sort of settled into over the last number of years is understanding that influencing policy is really the way to do that. And working on things like the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill in and of itself probably has a greater consequence on the fall flight of ducks than almost anything in the world. And so that's where we focus our time, effort, and energy, and obviously collaborate with DU and the Fish and Wildlife Service and Pheasants Forever and all those people. But so yeah, we've been in the habitat game for a long time. We just do it differently than the DUs or the Pheasants Forever or the Fish and Wildlife Service.
It's additive.
It's additive.
It's our contribution. And I think I love the way that it's focused as well, John. The Farm Bill, the large conservation programs. We've heard it said that 90% of the duck population originates from private, likely farm ground.
Right.
And so, I think a lot of people who haven't been to the prairies think of refuges or federal or state-owned.
Or it's wilderness.
Yeah. And no, it's privately owned farm ground.
Working.
And so if
land.
you want to get things done, you have to do it with the farm groups.
And, you take another notable example. Jim Fisher's work on Grow in Manitoba this year is another sort of great milestone and a demonstration that when Delta does this stuff, we can affect, really significant outcomes. The province of Manitoba, about this time last year, committed to conserving 90% of the type 1 and type 2 wetlands in Manitoba as a result of Delta's advocacy.
Yeah.
90% of wetlands is a lot of wetlands. And so, those are the sort of outcomes that we're hoping to affect with our habitat.
Yeah. One thing that's coming clear, Matt, John, got a long list of questions. Like, this is not going to happen all on one podcast. So we'll probably revisit some of these. But so I kind of want to hit two bigger ones here. And I think the first one, this is a super common, it's a very intelligent question, and it's an appropriate question. So our volunteers, members, donors freely give to the organization of time and money. It's appropriate for them to ask the question, where does my money go, right? And, we publish an annual report every year that clearly illustrates how we spend, those dollars. Our 990 is published every year. And so I think, what fraction of donations go into Delta programs? And that number is 87%. And so, we're 87% of those dollars go to the ground. And inside those numbers, inside that 87%, we do distribute it across those four pillars. About 27% goes to habitat conservation, or duck production, I'm sorry. About 27% to duck production, 13% to habitat conservation, 24% to Hunter 3, so the hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation efforts, and 36% goes to research and education. And so that's a real nice mix, and certainly that varies from year to year. Yep. There'll be a feature research project or a big push into our university hunting program or defending the hunt. But that, year in and year out, is a great mix. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add to that?
Not really. I mean, I think you covered that pretty good there, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah, I think going back to the comment I made a little bit ago about Jason Tharp in this orientation to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our duck hunters, we've built the programs that we believe meet that need, right? We think duck hunters want annual incremental duck production, and that's why we focus on hen house and prairie management. We know ducks and duck hunters need habitat solutions, right? That's pretty simple. We also know that there's a really clear need for good science to guide whatever we're doing, or how we can use our science to help the rest of the waterfowl management community do their jobs well or inform stuff like harvest. And we know duck hunters, need more duck hunters, and they need a voice standing up for them. So it's a pretty balanced set of programs that we perceive, and I think our donors, volunteers, and members perceive, is a balanced way to get to the world they want, which is abundant ducks and lots of opportunities to shoot them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, then that kind of begs the question, well, what's the other 13%? And, as a nonprofit, we don't receive appropriated funds from the federal government or state governments. And so that other 13% is what it takes to, to generate revenue, administrative function. And so I think that's when I travel, and I don't know about you guys, but when I travel, looking at a street full of hotels, and I look at which one I'm going to stay at, and I measure it in the number of memberships that it's going to cost to stay in that hotel. And so, of course, I try to use as few memberships as possible. And so it's we're frugal, notoriously frugal to a fault sometimes, but it's that, we all get out and travel quite a bit. We all spend time with our members, with our volunteers, and when you have that direct connection, and again, that's one of those things that I hope never goes away. Right. But I feel that responsibility to be really careful.
I mean, you think about it, whether it's the person that's writing a $30 annual membership check or the volunteer you look at the amount of volunteer time that's dedicated to this organization, it's incredible. And it also didn't exist when we got started, right? Yeah. And then, the donors making, significant financial commitments. We've got a real responsibility to be good stewards of those resources and do everything in our power to do our best to provide a return on investment in terms of ducks or opportunities for duck hunters as a result. And I think we do a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, I think so.
I was going to say, you call it frugal, and I think that we have a history of being frugal, but I think it also led to us being very efficient in the way we expend our dollars for duck hunters.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is, so we partner with a long list of groups, partly because I think it's just a better product. I think just more people working together. But the other part of it is, if you do it alone, you have to have the entire suite of tools and staff to deliver. If you're working on easements, you need realty staff, you need legal review, you need, if you're doing some type of dirt work, you need trucks, tractors, trailers. But when you partner, it's everyone looking at it going, okay, what can I bring to the table?
Right.
What can I save? Let's use your truck. Let's use your realty staff. Let's use
your GIS capacity.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's another way to, extend the mileage, of our budget.
Yeah, agreed.
It's a lot more fun anyway, too, right? Duck hunting social. So is a lot of the work we do. And I think we're going to finish with another one. So I'm going to blend two of the questions is, what does your organization do for me locally? And I'm going to blend the other one. What is WHF? And I guess I'll go ahead with that one. But, we'll start with what does Delta do for me locally? I think everything that we've talked about in this podcast from the first minute to now, every listener benefits from all of the work that we do, whether it's defending the hunt, whether it's regulations, ag policy, whether it's duck production, whether it's research. Everyone, and that's by design, everyone on this continent receives some benefit from those. But it is that common question. Okay, I live in this town. What do you do for me? And that if you're looking for an exact footprint on the ground there, you need to look to our chapter system. And that's a huge source of pride as well. And so that we'll bring in this other question of WHF. What is that? And so that stands for the Waterfowl Heritage Fund. That came along in 2003. And that's basically, I'll call it a revenue sharing program that we have with our fundraising chapters. So a chapter goes out, right guys, and they hold a banquet and they, when all of the spending and raising of money ceases and all the bills are paid, there's a chunk of money left. And, we decided back in 2003 that we wanted some of that money to stay local. We wanted it to be, we wanted the member to support our initiatives, love Delta, love what they get back from Delta, but we wanted them to have, I call it a buy-on-hand impact on their local community. So they retain or have the ability to spend 15% of those funds locally. So what they do does need to support Delta's mission. So it's, they can support a research project that's going on locally. They can hold a first hunt event. So First Hunt is our hunter recruitment program delivered by our volunteers in our chapter system. They can put out nest structures. Wood duck boxes are real common. Hen houses are also common, but maybe a little bit more geographically limited. We do have goose tubs that go out, scholarships. We think it's a great idea if a student from a local high school wants to, is a avid duck hunter, wants to go into the field of conservation, that the chapter can support, them with a scholarship. And so that's, to me, the easiest way to go out and look and see some type of impact. Do you guys have any types of chapter efforts that you really identify with?
I think, the chapter effort's a big one. And obviously the buy-on-hand WHF stuff is a very tangible example about that. But I also think that, our chapters are engaged in lots of other things beyond their WHF event, right? And, a great Delta chapter holds a really good, productive membership and fundraising event, does maybe mentored youth hunt, but then they're involved in advocacy issues, right? Making sure that, Marsh XYZ stays open, in some of those things. So I'm proud, very proud of WHF, because I think it's a way for the best of Delta's mission to be present in communities all over the United States and Canada and have real meaningful impact, whether it's, more ducks produced through wood duck boxes or new kids or young adults introduced to waterfowl hunting. But our chapters do so much in the work they're doing on being concerned about habitat and hunting issues in their communities is remarkable.
Kind of
And
like
those,
our ears on the ground. Like they bring, many of our chapter members bring waterfowl issues to Delta and make us aware of them so that we can go to bat and we can organize our members and chapters to be a voice for those issues.
so that's, I mean, you know, depending upon where you live, if you're on the top of a mountain in West Virginia, it might be kind of hard. But, you know, there's lots of places that, you know, Delta's having an impact on you as a duck hunter and in lots of different ways.
Right. And I think everybody loves signs, right? I want to see a sign. Our chapters, you know, if they do a project, a boots on the ground project, we support them with helping them construct a sign to mark, you know, their impact, whether it's a nest structure project or maybe they partner with the state on an infrastructure improvement project, a water control structure, for example, a boat ramp into the public hunting ground that's deteriorated. They can put a sign out, and with permission, obviously, they can put a sign out there. You know, we've even had chapters who hold large waterfowl education days at a local trap range, gun club. And with permission from the gun club, you know, they can place a sign on the wall of the clubhouse, you know, that proudly promotes the work that they're doing together. And so it's really cool. And, you know, it's a long list of accomplishments. And I think, you know, the chapters, our volunteers, our members, that's our lifeblood. And I'd love to see them spend their money.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. But I don't know, do you guys have any questions that were on the list that are just can't wait till next time?
I think we're probably pretty good. We've probably taken up about as much energy as anybody's going to want to commit to this first.
There's a lot of questions I'm excited to talk about, you know, another day, but
yeah, I think the last easy one, how many employees does Delta have? And I counted it the other day and it's 55. And so, you know, it's spread all across the US and Canada, primarily, you know, in the home office, I suppose, but 55 is the
biggest single
answer.
Collection here, in Bismarck. But
yeah,
so it wasn't that long ago where I don't think we would have ever dreamed that, right?
No, that's for sure. So I guess we're gonna wrap it up there, and for everybody that stuck with us through this whole podcast, we appreciate it. Again, encourage you to go back and listen to past podcasts. If you have any questions, either of these guys or myself, like I said, we're all available. Go to our website. You can find our email address or call the Bismarck office and go through the switchboard and find us. On the next podcast, I'm going to have Paul Waite. He's the editor of our magazine, and Scott Petrie, our CEO, and we're going to talk about the Delta Waterfowl history book that it's almost complete, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so Paul went out and did extensive research on the history of Delta waterfowl, and I promise you, 3/4 of the stuff in that book is going to be new to me. So I'm going to bring those guys on the podcast. We're going to talk about this book, talk about some of the cool things in there, maybe some, you know, never would have guessed, you know, type factoids, and then obviously talk about when it's going to be released and available. So again, I guess if it's hunting season in your neck of the woods, good luck and be safe. And until next time, everybody take care.